Hey, and welcome to the new and improved Pod Cafe, the book club of the modern era. I'm your oldest brother, Nick Potts.
And I'm Emily Potts.
And, we drink coffee and talk about the podcast we're listening to.
Yeah, and this is an exciting episode because we're going to do things differently, and this is our first attempt.
Yeah, this is episode 01, technically. Kind of. On iTunes, they don't let you 00 title an episode, so I had to make last episode 00, episode 001 on iTunes, and then this will be 01.
Wow, that's confusing. Okay.
Yeah, well, it'll only get better from here on out. But what kind of coffee are you drinking today?
Today I am drinking a chai latte. It's pretty good. I don't know, I like cinnamon, so it's kind of got a nice cinnamon flavor to it. Just made it with my K-cup in my Keurig. That's about it. What about you?
I went crazy today.
Crazy.
And I found it is also a K-cup, but it's a caramel macchiato, and it comes with a froth packet. So you dump the, froth milk powder into your cup, and then you make the K-cup espresso in your device, and then it pours into the froth cup, and then it makes a caramel macchiato. And it actually tastes really good. My expectations were really low for it, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Well, that's awesome. That sounds pretty great. Actually, it's kind of confusing that, what's a froth packet? Is it like powdered milk?
Well, it looks like, yeah, pretty much. It looks like powdered milk. It looks like this. What? Where's my camera?
Oh, yeah,
it comes in a very thick, kind of crystal light looking packet, and you just dump it in before you make the coffee, and then it makes the froth on top of your macchiato, and it worked out pretty well.
It's awesome. Well, I'm happy for you. What would you
I'm pretty excited.
What would you give your coffee on a rating of 1 to 10?
Well, it's not like a bought caramel macchiato, which we've already talked about is always better. So, but as far as K-cups go, I'd give it a solid 8.
Okay, that's a pretty good rating.
Yeah, it's too early to tell how the caffeine effect is gonna be, but as far as just taste and overall presentation, I'd give it an 8.
All right, that's pretty good.
What about you? What are you rating your coffee today?
I would give my chai latte probably a 7. It has good flavor, but I think it's just, it's always better when you buy it at a coffee shop, but it's good flavor. It's just, maybe a little watery. Maybe I put too much in, or maybe it should be made on a smaller cup. So a 7. We're going to go 7.
Okay, 7's not bad still. It's above average. Cool. Well, today we are, for the first actual review podcast, we are starting with the comedy genre, correct? Genre.
Yes, we're starting in the comedies.
And for the first comedy, we chose to do My Brother, and Me, which has kind of been a long time coming, I think.
Would you say this is your favorite podcast? Because you love this podcast.
Well, I don't know that it's my favorite, but I will say, pre-warning, that I do like it a lot, so it's going to be hard for me not to give it a good rating, but I am actually excited to break it down into pieces and see what parts I actually like, and if there is any parts that I don't like at all.
Okay, I'm excited. Do you want to give the listeners a little background on what this podcast is about?
Yeah, sure. So this podcast is done by the McElroy brothers, and basically what they say is they take your questions and turn them alchemy-like into wisdom. And what that essentially means is people will write in and ask questions, and they also pull questions from Yahoo Answers, and they basically don't answer them, or they answer them in a very humorous manner, and give you terrible advice. They always say not to take the advice they give. But that's basically it. Otherwise, it's just a conversation between three brothers.
Yeah, and they do sometimes live shows. Sometimes they have guests.
Yeah, they do have guests sometimes. It doesn't happen very often. But yeah, they do live shows too. They call them face-to-faces, and they're basically the exact same show, except questions will be pulled from the audience as well. But yeah.
And I think this podcast comes out once a week?
Once a week, every... not every Thursday. Every Tuesday? Monday? I'm not sure.
Once a week.
Yeah, it comes out once a week.
Yeah.
That's all I got for background.
All right.
You want to jump into the criteria?
Yeah, I do. So
All right.
let's start with the intro and the music.
All right. Best place to start, the beginning. So they this podcast has like an actual introduction monologue, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Done by Clint McElroy, their father, and basically it's what we kind of talked about. He says their advice should never be followed. Throw some jokes in there.
Yep.
That's pretty much the intro, and then the song they use is called "The Departure" by I forget who. I should have prepared for this, but I didn't. I forgot who it's by, but they use an actual song from a band.
And they also introduce themselves like oldest brother, youngest brother, middleest brother, which is why...
like I did today.
Yeah, which is what you did today. I would say the funniest thing is that even when listening to it, sometimes I struggle to know which one is talking.
Well, they all have the same, like, nasally voice.
Yeah. So, which is funny. I'm glad they introduced themselves, but I tend to forget almost immediately.
Well, my favorite is Griffin's 30 under 30 media luminary.
Yeah.
Introduction.
Yeah. How come he's the only one?
Somehow he made that list.
Yeah. But also, how come he's the only one that gets like a little accredited thing next to his intro?
I don't know. It's weird because I never looked into why he made that list. I imagine it was for Polygon, but the thing is, him and Justin, his brother, co-founded Polygon with some other people, so I don't know why it would just be him. It could be, I don't know, his like video game journalism videos got a lot of traction on the internet, so maybe that too.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I didn't look into it.
Yeah, me neither. But yeah, that's pretty funny. So as far as their intro song goes, what do you think of it?
I think I like it. It's not like terribly catchy where it's like stuck in my head ever, but it's a good intro. I like it.
How do you feel about using an actual band song versus your own music, making your own music?
I actually like that, I think, for the reason that then if you ever hear that actual band song, you kind of think back to the podcast, you know?
Yeah, that helps. That helps with, it probably helps both ways. It helps marketing both the podcast and the band.
Yeah, a little bit of recognition. I like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely didn't know about the band until I listened to them, so that's something. Here's what I think. I feel like most podcasts use music already out there by bands or artists or something. I think most people don't make their own. I think we do. We make our own music, but to me, it's mostly because nobody knows about us yet. So if we asked somebody to use their music, I don't think they'd have a big enough reason to say yes.
And I feel like there's like copywriting things that go into that, and that just seemed like another step in launching this podcast.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, we'd have to get permission from an artist to use their song, and I don't know who's gonna give that to us right now. I don't think anyone yet.
So, what would you give my brother and me's intro on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, I really do like their song choice because I don't know. It seems to fit their personalities with the lyrics. It's familiar, but not too familiar, but not too not familiar. It just fits. It fits them. And the intro is pretty funny. So I will give it a... do I want to start with a 10 out of 10?
I don't know, that you're setting the bar high.
I feel like I'm going to start with a 10.
Oh.
I'm going to start all the way up through introductions. 10 out of 10.
Okay. I think I'm going to give it a 9.
Why 9? What lost the point?
I think the fact that it doesn't stick in my head means it's not doing something for me. Like, it's not quite catchy enough for me that it does, like, I like it, but it's not, like, terribly, terribly catchy to me, you know? So it gets a 9.
Okay, that's fair. That's really funny because I will actually find myself singing it sometimes.
I don't know. It just doesn't have that effect for me.
The problem is I've never heard the whole song, so I only know up to "It's a New Craze," and then that's it.
That was beautiful.
But okay, so 10 out of 10 from Nick, 9 out of 10 from Emily. That's a pretty good start.
That's a good
what do we
start.
got next on the criteria list?
Okay, next we're going to talk about the content.
The content. So the content is pretty all over the place. But I mean all over the place in subject matter, I guess, but it's all essentially the same as we said, them answering questions and giving advice.
Yeah. I think their content it's funny and it's usually entertaining. I feel like I'm not as entertained until they start getting into the actual questions, though. Like, sometimes, they do their introduction, then they kind of just talk for a little bit. And sometimes the initial just talking about anything piece loses me a little bit.
Just the brother banter.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's not, like, something I actually, like, find entertaining or something, then I'm kind of like, eh. But then they bring me back.
I think there's a little bit of a loosening up, maybe warming up period. But at the same time, it's that I think is what makes this podcast so successful, because the whole thing is literally just three brothers having a conversation. They're just talking, and I feel like if there were no microphones, the same exact conversation would be happening.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's fair.
And I do think their content is hilarious, even though, they almost never give actual advice on the questions. And if they do, it's pretty ridiculous. But I think that's the point of the show. That's the fun of it. So
I wonder why people actually send in questions when they know they won't ever be answered.
I think it's literally just to be on their show. They just want their name on the show. And
engage with the podcast.
Fans. Yeah, they just want to be a part of it. Because some people ask ridiculous questions. I don't know. It's great. There's so many bits on YouTube that they have cut from the podcast and not deleted, but separated out and just made bits on you okay?
Sorry, I'm joking. On nothing.
Okay.
Okay, continue.
Maybe a 6 out of 10 for that coffee.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, there's so many clip bits on YouTube that you can just watch, and they're hilarious. And I don't know. There are very few podcasts that I have literally laughed out loud, cracked up at.
I also like that their content kind of has a little bit of variety. So, when they do the face-to-face shows or when they have a guest or things like that, to just kind of switch things up. So it's not always them talking and answering questions, and they have a little variety to it. But I think that's good. It gives them a little bit of just, they don't do the same thing every episode. It doesn't get boring. It kind of keeps you listening. So I think I like that they do switch things up every once in a while.
So put a number on. What number would you put on it?
I think content is going to get an 8 from me.
An 8? It misses 2 points.
I know, but here's the thing. I think it's funny that they kind of just go on crazy tangents when a question is asked and don't ever answer it. But I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, wait, that was actually a good question. Can we get an answer? And then I think just the fact that in some of their brother banter, they lose me sometimes. So I gotta dock them a point there. I'm gonna be a tough critic, you know?
I think that feels like the dynamic. I think you're gonna be the bad cop, and I'm gonna be the good cop on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think an 8's still a good score.
An 8 is still a very good score. Content from me gets a 10 out of 10.
Oh, gosh. Are you going to do this to every podcast you listen to?
No, because I'm not going to like every podcast. But I just can't think of a reason I would dock them a point.
I think just based on the podcast I like to listen to, I like to actually learn something or get some information.
So you just like the more educational kind of podcast.
Yeah, and like...
than straight up entertainment.
You don't really learn anything from them.
No, not usually.
So that's why I'm going with an 8. All right. Let's talk about the podcast, I don't know, entertainment level.
This is the intangibles.
Yeah, kind of like, were you hooked? Did you want to keep listening?
Well, word, you know I'm hooked.
Yeah, you're hooked.
I will go to YouTube and just look up video clips of it.
So should we just assume you're giving them a 10 on that?
10 out of 10 for entertainment value.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. They're definitely funny. Sometimes they're like, it's a little bit of a stretch for me in their what they're joking about or what they're saying, but I think they're funny in general. I still feel...
So this is a podcast that I will literally get notifications about when a new episode comes out, and I will listen to it. I will try to listen to it day of, if not even sooner. How often do you actually listen to this podcast, and how often do you find yourself wanting to go back and listen to more?
Well, for the purposes of our podcast today, I listened to it pretty much all week. Typically, I probably listen to one episode maybe every other week or so, but I'm not caught up. I miss some. I miss most.
Okay, so I mean that's good. Give it a score then. Definitely not a 10 out of 10. Doesn't even sound like maybe even an 8 out of 10.
No, I think I would give it like a 6 because here's why. I like it. I do think it's entertaining, but I think it's just for that factor of like usually when I'm listening to a podcast, I listen a little bit more for just pure entertainment, you know? So like I usually like either like the guest or want to learn something or need, you know, like an update or, you know, something like that, you know, where I kind of want a little more out of my podcast. So I would give this a 6 because I don't feel the need to listen to it every week. If I can't really find anything and I just want something just to listen to while I'm working out or at work or something like that, then I might throw it on. But I don't like have that feeling. So it just
doesn't have that strong draw for you. It doesn't pull you in.
Yeah, I think that it's just, you know, the content's only an 8. It's not giving me enough.
Okay. All right.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel. But I mean, I don't know.
That's good. Okay. What's the next criteria?
So next we're going to talk about the structure of it. So kind of what they do, how it's laid out, doesn't make sense.
The structure's pretty straightforward on this one, although they do introduce different segments sometimes. So they have the listener questions, obviously. People email or tweet in or whatever. Then they have the Yahoo Answers segment, which is where people will send in questions from Yahoo Answers that are ridiculous, and then they'll talk about those.
Yep.
Then they'll sometimes have like Justin has the haunted doll watch, which is basically where he goes on eBay and he will find people selling haunted dolls and they'll read the post for him and talk about that. That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, that one's funny.
And then Justin also has his munch shoot. It's the podcast within a podcast about food. It's like basically PR stuff and public announcements about, I don't know, the fast food industry or any kind of food thing. So there's that, and then that's essentially it. And then they have their money zone. They call it the money zone, where halfway through the podcast they go in and that's where they talk about their sponsors and stuff. You know what? We didn't talk about this in the content criteria, but I actually think they do one of the bests out of any podcast I listen to in talking about their sponsors. Like, I actually don't always feel the need to skip over that part.
Yeah, I think they do good with that too, and I think like they do talk about their sponsors really well, and I think they also how long the segment's gonna be. They give it the same amount of time, and yeah, it's easy to not want to skip through.
Yeah, it's very colloquial, and they're still making jokes about the sponsors and doing bits in that sponsor segment in the money zone. So anyway, that's more content, but so that's the basic structure. I mean, it's question and answer pretty much most of the time. Yeah,
I think so. The episodes are about an hour each episode, right?
Yeah, ish. Usually, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less.
Which I think is good. I like that, length. I think they do a good job of, just kind of separating out how much time they spend on everything. Their intro is good, and then they spend, a good, couple minutes just, like what you said, getting warmed up, chatting it out. And then they go through other segments. I feel like they space it out really well. I think their timing is good, and that's, I think, what I like about the structure. They don't spend, too much time on anything, but they're also not, rushing through anything,
Yeah, I think so, too, and I think actually having the money zone in the middle is a really good idea because it's a lot harder to skip over the sponsor part than most people either have it at the beginning or end, but in the middle, you have to listen to that first bit, and then get to that, and then you got to get through that to get to the last half of the episode.
Yeah.
So it's harder to just start 5 minutes in instead of you got to get through it in the middle. So that's a good idea structure wise.
Probably good for their sponsors too. To have it in the middle.
Yeah, definitely. So structure for me, I guess.
Let me guess, a 10.
10 out of 10. I mean, it's very simple, but that's not necessarily bad. I'm gonna give it. You know what? I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10, just because their structure is it doesn't wow me. Something like Ear Hustle would get a 10 out of 10 because their structure was stand out. So I'm gonna go as far and give this 9 out of 10.
I think I agree. I'll give it a 9 because, yeah, I mean, it's a good structure, basic structure, but it wasn't anything that's oh, the way they have this podcast built is amazing.
Yeah, the structure doesn't make or break the podcast. Yeah. It's just it's pretty basic.
Well, we only have one more criteria to get through here, and we're going to talk about the production of it.
Okay. So I know that Griffin does the production stuff. He does all the editing. That's just a little piece of information. That doesn't matter, really.
Thank you for that.
That's nothing. I think, again, the editing's... I don't know. The editing's good. The music is placed in there well. The Money Zone music comes in well. I bet they edit a lot more stuff out than we think. I bet they go off on way crazier tangents than they leave in there.
Yeah, I could see that.
I I don't have anything like fantastic to say about the editing. I think they've been doing it for a while. They all have good equipment, so the audio quality is really good. The live show quality, it's still, as far as like live shows go, it's still pretty good. I don't know. Do you have anything like super to say about it?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like I feel the same way. It's good. They edit it. It doesn't ever sound bad or that they like didn't edit correctly, getting it all, put together. But it's also nothing that stands out, I guess, either. I don't know.
Which I suppose is good, right? Like, if something does stand out, it means they're probably doing something very obviously wrong as far as editing goes.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing really good editing, you're not going to notice it at all.
I also think they edit, and go between segments pretty well. Like, it usually flows pretty smoothly, I would say.
Yeah, the transitions are good. I mean, I guess, like, Justin's transitions to his podcast within a podcast are just interrupting his brothers and going into his podcasts.
Yeah, they do that a lot.
Yeah, as far as being three of them, they do a pretty good job of not talking over each other. I bet they edit a bunch of that out, too.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think they're really good at, which is maybe why I struggle to figure out who's talking when. Because they're really good at, like, one talks, another talks. Like, they have a good sequence in that.
I think for me, I'm going to give their production another 9 out of 10, just because I feel like they could probably edit some more stuff out. There are some tangents they go on that are pretty long and sometimes lose me. But I don't know. As far as editing goes, it pretty much is unnoticeable, which I think is the best thing to say about podcast editing.
I think so too. I'm going to give it a 9 as well for the same reason. It's like good. Sometimes they lose me and I wish they would cut something out and move on, but overall I think it's good.
Yeah, quality's good. Audio's good. I don't know. Yeah, it's real good. So I guess we're down to it then. We're down to an overall number. Overall, what do you give My Brother and Me?
So, question on how we're doing this. Are you going to give it a new number, or are we just taking the average of all of our previous criteria numbers?
That's a good question. Originally I was going to say we average them, our numbers together. But right now, I was feeling like, just how you feel overall. What do you give it?
Okay, I think overall I'm going to give it like a 7.5.
Okay, 7.5. That's pretty good.
Like I said, it's a good podcast. It's funny. It's fun to listen to, but it's not like my typical podcast. Not something that like I would want to listen to every day.
Yeah, okay. I hear that. I mean,
they're just
even if, I don't know, do you want to average?
Well, if we average them, then mine's an 8.2. And I think that's higher than what I want to give them.
So that's interesting. I think we should do both on the podcast, because that's interesting. So why overall do you feel like you rated it lower than your average?
Well, I think the overall rating to me is more focused in on the content and the do I want to go back and listen pieces. Like in my head, I'm like, yeah, it's like a 7.5 because it's not usually my normal kind of podcast. It doesn't give me as much as I want to get out of a podcast. But I mean, I did give them good ratings in terms of just like it's structured well, it's produced well, so that brings up the average naturally.
So I think when giving people a number, I think we just go with our feeling of an overall rating. We could tell them what the average is, but I think just the overall rating we feel is probably the more interesting number to go with.
Yeah, so mine's a 7.5. I think if you like comedies and like just kind of hearing people's thoughts and like conversational banter and things like that, it's a great podcast. It's pretty funny. They talk about a lot of pretty funny things. It's probably fun to write into as well and send questions. But in general, I look for a little more utility in my podcast.
Yeah, I feel that there's not a whole lot of learning you're going to be doing in this one.
Yeah, I think maybe just straight up comedy conversation isn't my genre, but it might be for you. I think it is for you, actually.
You know what we didn't talk about as far as structure goes, which I often think about for our podcast, but it's a very good idea, is the jumbotrons that they do during the Money Zone. So a jumbotron is not a sponsor. Basically what you can do is you can pay them to make an announcement or an advertisement for yourself or your business or whatever. So you can just give them $100 and they will read a message to somebody, or you can advertise. A lot of people advertise their own podcasts. So I think that's a really good idea that isn't very common in podcasting. But anyway, that is neither here nor there. As far as my overall rating, it's pretty, even the average is pretty close. So I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10, just because I love this podcast.
You are fangirling so hard right now.
Easy 10 out of 10. Would love to be a guest on this podcast one day.
Subtle plug.
Yeah. But my average was a 9.6 out of 10. So, I don't know, pretty much the same. I gave it 2 9s, so it's going to drop it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. 10 out of 10. So we get a 10 out of 10 from me and a 7.6. Is that what you said?
7.5. Kept it around 7.5.
7.5 out of 10 for you. So overall, pretty good first outing. Pretty good ratings for this first podcast.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to be the tough critic in comparison to you.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if and how that changes depending on the podcast. Like, I knew I was going to love this podcast going in. But as we start doing podcasts we haven't listened to before, I think it's going to change.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I got no problem giving a 1 to a not-so-good podcast. We'll see how that goes. We'll see what happens. I'm not going to be giving 10 out of 10s to every podcast. I'm not going to be like, well, you tried your best, and as long as you're having a good time, you can have a 10 out of 10. Not that kind of rater.
That's good. I think I'm glad that you clearly like this one, which is okay, but you'll be objective in the grading. That's good.
Yeah, I will. I gave them 9s out of 10s. I didn't just give them that last point.
Another thing I feel like that we didn't really talk about but is cool about this podcast is that, or at least an easy one to get into, is the fact that the episodes don't rely on a previous, so you can kind of listen to whichever ones, listen out of order. Like, I think that's a good thing, because that helps get more listeners in, because they don't have to, start from the beginning or something like that.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that, but that is true. They're not, what do they call that? Episodic? They're not seasonal. They break it into seasons, but you don't have to start from the beginning. There's a lot of podcasts that you have to start from the beginning. Yeah, you're right. You could just jump in wherever. I didn't start from the beginning. I don't know that I've heard the first bunch.
Do you have any favorite episodes that we...
Yep.
So maybe you should recommend them to our listeners, for anyone who's interested in checking it out.
Shrimp Heaven Now. Start with that episode. Not sure what number it is, but you'll find it anywhere. It is the best. I am considering putting a little bit of that audio into our podcast here and letting you hear it, because it is the funniest thing you will ever hear. Shrimp Heaven Now. Listen to that episode. If you haven't listened before, start with that one. So good.
I don't think I listened to that one, so maybe I'll have to.
You should definitely listen to that one. It's the funniest.
All right, I'll check it out.
All right, well, I think that is it for this first Pod Cafe review podcast.
Awesome.
I have been your oldest brother, Nick Potts. All right, where can not true. I was gonna say everywhere you could listen to us before, you still can. That hasn't changed, but it has actually.
Yeah, you can find us on thepodcafe.libsyn.com. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Did I miss any?
Yeah, those are two big new ones. Is we are officially on iTunes.
Yay! Give us a
review came through,
rating.
and yeah, rate us, share us, do the. I'm not familiar with iTunes. I don't have an iPod, or an iPhone. I don't know how it works.
Does anyone still have an iPod?
Is that not a thing anymore?
I don't think so.
Oh, I still have like an iPod Shuffle somewhere. Anyway, so Stitcher and iTunes are the two newest ones you can find us on.
Woohoo! And if you want to email us or tweet at us, we love that. So we're at podcafe.contact@gmail.com or on Twitter at @the_podcafe. So yeah, interact with us, chat with us.
Submit your own podcast for review.
Yeah, do that.
Gladly do it.
If it falls within one of our genres, we'll check it out.
Which it probably does.
It for sure does. I think most have a genre.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, happy Sunday. Keep listening to those podcasts, and we'll keep putting a number on it.
Woo! How'd that go?